Small-town boy Corey Wynn had always longed for a big adventure.
I really hadn't even left Texas very much when I was a kid or even a teenager. I think we went to Oklahoma once, but it's just the next state over.
So after his high school graduation, Corey joined the Marines and bought a one-way ticket out of town. By 2004, the 21-year-old was posted at 29 Palms, California, a small military base in the middle of the Mojave Desert. He was working in the armory and quickly moving up the ranks. But while Corey's career was on the move, his love life had stalled.
You're still moving around again in the military every couple of years, so you get lonely, and you know the family idea starts to look more and more appetizing.
So that summer, when he caught the eye of 28-year-old Bobby Ann Finley at a late-night diner, he knew it was time to take a chance.
She actually sees me sitting by myself, just watching everybody, and then she said, "You can come sit with us." So I started talking to everybody that was at the table, and started talking to Bobby quite a bit more.
Before the night was over, Corey had plans to meet Bobby the next day at a nearby airport where she was handing out flyers for a local business.
We went out to the airport that day, and we were just hanging out. She seemed like a lot of fun. She had a really outgoing personality. She'd tell these stories, you know, that just, you know, is like, wow, it was like, that's some, you know, those are wild, interesting stories, you know.
It seemed the attraction was mutual. Within a week, the two were inseparable, spending all their free time together. And before long, Bobby told Corey a shocking secret.
She confesses to me that she's pregnant. She says she's pregnant, you know, from a rape. And I started to feel really bad, you know, for her situation.
But to ease Corey's mind, Bobby told him that she had a plan.
She had also had told me that her grandfather was a big name in a clothing organization, and there was a certain amount of money that was going to be coming into her possession, at least well over $100,000.
Corey knew Bobby needed the money, but there was a catch in her grandfather's will.
She couldn't get it unless she had gotten married before her 29th birthday.
And Bobby's 29th birthday was only 1 week away.
Bobby actually proposed to me. She said that, you know, she would be able to support herself, be able to support the baby with this money. And that whole family idea is really what motivated me towards marrying her so quickly.
A few days later, on August 18th, 2004, Corey and Bobby were married in Joshua Tree, California by a retired military chaplain.
I thought it was great. It was very informal because she said she was a country girl too herself, so she wasn't looking for the big wedding dress or anything like that. So we got married in blue jeans.
I get a call and it was a done deal. And I think that the fact that he went through so quickly just really surprised me. He's not impulsive like that normally.
But the battlefields of love are scattered with unlucky soldiers. And Corey Wynn would be no exception. Late on February 13th, 2005, nearly 6 months into his marriage, Corey lay awake on his friend's couch. Life with Bobby hadn't been easy, but this weekend had been like no other. Around 3 a.m., Corey's phone rang, but it wasn't Bobby on the line. It was the base police.
I get a call from the MPs, and they tell me that they want to come talk to me. So I told them, I said, okay. So I went outside, and you know, I waved them down as I came around the corner.
But the police weren't looking to just talk. Before he knew it, Corey was handcuffed and on his way to jail. And he had no idea why.
There was nothing I could do. I was confused and I was going to jail.
In September of 2004, 5 months before Corey Wynn's world would be turned upside down, the newly married soldier was busy learning how to be a husband with a new baby on the way.
We got a joint checking account. I'd actually put her on the name from my account, you know. That was one of those things I thought you were supposed to do as a married couple. You know, she didn't have a job, so my income was her income.
The couple rented a house in Joshua Tree, California. And before long, the new Mrs. Wynn found a way to occupy her time.
Bobby was getting furniture that was a little nicer than I expected, or spending quite a bit on groceries.
And he called me and he said that Bobby was buying this for the baby and this for the baby. And I said, well, that's part of nesting. Women are going to do that. You just got to keep it in control. And I don't think even at that point Corey had any idea how much money she was spending.
But only 2 months later, in October of 2004, Corey had concerns of a different kind. Bobby told him that the doctor had diagnosed her with toxemia, a serious condition for expectant mothers.
She said, the doctor said, this is one of the things she should avoid is stress. Maybe that it would be best if she could find a way to live away from the base, away from the actual military lifestyle for a little bit. That's when we actually talked to my dad and my stepmom and asked them if Bobby could come stay with them for a little while.
With Bobby at her in-laws' house in Texas, Corey moved back into the barracks to save money. But worries about the baby didn't seem to slow down Bobby's spending habit. Before long, bounced checks began to arrive.
When some of the checks started getting back to my command, actually takes me in to question me about it. My CO and my staff sergeant at the time told me you're not going to be allowed to work in the armory anymore with these debts that are looming. And so they removed me from the armory.
Corey was devastated. His once solid career was on shaky ground, but he had made a promise that he intended to keep.
I made a commitment to her and to having a family, and I know I'm so far involved in this relationship that I'm gonna have to stick through it at any cost.
When Corey asked Bobby about using the inheritance to pay off her debts, she told him there was a problem with the will and the money would be delayed. But in early December, Corey's credit issues suddenly took a back seat when he received a surprising call.
The doctor in Texas was actually going to induce her labor. They wanted to get me emergency leave from the military, so I flew back to Texas, and she has the baby through C-section.
We all went to the hospital, and the baby was premature, and we didn't know if the baby was going to make it. And so we all sat there and waited and waited.
They said he was going to have to be there for about another month. He had breathing tubes and jaundice. He was so small, you'd sit him on your chest, and even though his arms were only about as wide as my chest could be, it felt like he was, hugging you anyway.
The proud parents named him Corey Jr. 7 days later, it was time for Corey to fly back to California, but he didn't want to leave while the baby was still in the hospital.
Priority-wise, it was always God, family, Marine Corps. They wouldn't extend my emergency leave just because I'm in the hospital, and so I decided I'm going to stay anyway.
We tried to talk to him, you can't go AWOL, you don't understand what AWOL is. But he wasn't going to leave that baby, and I was worried about what they would do to him.
Despite his mother's warning, Corey told the Marines that he wasn't coming back. His career was now on the line. And before long, his marriage would be too.
There's a warning given to most servicemen as they join that there are women like this out there.
I don't think there was a single thing that she ever told me that actually meant anything to her.
In late December of 2004, what should have been the happiest time in Corey Wynn's life was just the opposite. Corey Jr., a preemie born almost a month early, had made a miraculous recovery. But Corey had gone AWOL with the Marine Corps, and it was time to return and face his superiors.
After he got out of the hospital, I went and turned myself in the military. And there were several charges pressed against me, so it wasn't a very warm welcome.
The Marines offered to drop the charges if Corey took a cut in rank and pay. But convinced he had done the right thing, Corey opted for a court-martial instead. As the Marines prepared for the trial, Corey got ready to bring his family back to California.
I got base housing, and Bobby moved back within a week or two. But I told Bobby that this time around, when we're gonna set up the house, we're gonna do it the cheapest way possible.
Corey hoped it was a fresh start for the new family, but the stability at home didn't last long.
Bobby seemed to lay around a lot during the day. The house wouldn't stay clean. When I'd get home, I'd take care of the baby, and I'd clean the house.
On the night of February 11th, the situation reached a breaking point.
I found out that there's more bounce checks that Bobby's written, and I wasn't going to let her just talk me down this time. We need to fix this. So we get into another argument. She tells me that she wants me out of the house. And she calls my staff sergeant, and he tells me just go stay at a friend's house for the weekend. We'll figure out some kind of arrangement come Monday.
So Corey got a ride to a friend's house. But later that night, around 2 a.m., he received an urgent call.
Some of my friends seen my car was out at a bar, and they were asking me, why is your car the only one in the parking lot? And I said, I don't know. And my immediate concern was, where's Corey? So I get a ride out to go pick the car up, and I come back to the house.
Corey's fears were confirmed when he pulled up and saw a strange white van in his driveway.
I go up to the door, and both locks are locked, the deadbolt and the handle. So by the time I got both locks undone to walk into the house, Bobby's jumping up off the couch with another guy. I didn't make it past the doorway because she's running towards me, and I just said, you know, the heck with it, and I left.
Corey was reeling, so he went back to his friend's house to cool off. But a day later, around 5 a.m., his phone rang again, and this time it was the base police.
I get a call from the MPs, and they tell me that they want to come talk to me. So I went outside, and I waved them down as I came around the corner.
But their response wasn't exactly what Corey expected.
They tell me, get on your face. So I got down on the ground. The MP come put a knee in the back of my neck and threw handcuffs on me. They took me to the MP station, and I said, I don't know what has really gone on.
At the station, officers threw Corey into a cell and finally explained why he had been arrested.
Bobby had accused me of hitting her. She had told the police, apparently, that I had hit her, but I had never, ever laid my hands on a woman. It just wouldn't happen. I was released to my staff sergeant that day, but I had to stay with him until the next morning, until my command could sort out the charges. So I called my mother, and I told her what had happened.
And that's when I started going, that's extremely strange. My father was a police officer, my ex-husband was a police officer, so yeah, I made some phone calls. I signed on to a crime search online, and I found out that there was more than one name attached to her.
She had came across several warrants with different last names, different social security numbers. It was all real suspicious. So I took it to the MP station that next Tuesday.
Base police ran a background check and soon discovered that Bobby was wanted for check fraud. They also realized that her domestic violence claim against Corey was fake too.
She had apparently slapped herself because the thumbprint turned out on the wrong side.
Bobby's lies had backfired. Police immediately arrested her for the check fraud charges. But Corey's biggest concern was for the baby. Since he wasn't legally the father, little Corey Jr. was placed in foster care.
I said, I'll hand him over this on-base foster care program for the time being. So you can sort out what you want to do, but I really want to get custody of him.
Everything had happened so quickly. Corey realized he had no idea who Bobby Ann Finley was.
At this point, I know there's no way back.
But halfway across the country, someone else was also digging into Bobby's past. And Corey would soon find out that his ordeal was just the tip of the iceberg.
I was just out there to help my son, but these guys just happened to be part of the puzzle.
Bobby's story is unlike anything I've ever seen.
I mean, nothing that she ever said was true.
If you have a story of marriage gone wrong and would like to appear on this series, go to investigation.discovery.com. In February of 2005, Corey Wynn was on the brink of losing it all. His wife was behind bars, his marriage was over, and he was about to lose custody of the baby he had vowed to love and raise.
They put Corey into this on-base foster care program so that they could decide what the next step was. And I went to court to try to get custody.
By the end of March, Bobby had posted bail and was living around 29 Palms. But with all that had transpired, the court declared that the baby could not return home. Legally, there was nothing more Corey Wynn could do about it.
That's really the hardest part of the whole ordeal was I tried to fight to keep him. I fought to get him into this world, and I fought to keep him with me. So, you know, for a while, I pretty well crawled into a bottle and stayed there.
Over the next 2 years, Corey's court-martial was dropped, and he left the military to move back to Texas. He hadn't spoken to Bobby since her arrest, even though they were still legally married, and he had no idea where she was. But in April of 2008, Corey picked up the phone to receive unbelievable news about his estranged wife.
I called Corey and told him that my son had been scammed by Bobby in 2004, and I understand that he married her soon after while she was carrying the child she's now alleging is my son's. And he said, well, she said that she had been raped. And I said, raped?
I mean, I was shocked. I just didn't know what to think.
Katie told Corey that she believed the baby's father was her son Rodney. But due to legal red tape, trying to prove it seemed impossible.
My son went to court, and basically he was told the county had released the child for adoption, and his only option was file suit against the county. He tried contacting numerous attorneys. Nobody would even give him a call back. So it pretty much stopped right there. Then the media got involved, finally.
I got a phone call from Katie about this story, and we felt sort of an urgency to get the story on, and we discovered after Bobby left Rodney, she moved to California, and from what I understand, it wasn't much time after she was in California that she met Corey, and it was literally the same story all over again.
And it seemed that Corey and Rodney Wegg were far from the only victims to fall for Bobby's lies.
I didn't understand why somebody would come to town and do this. And so I started to investigate her, and from what I found out in my investigation at that point was that Corey was around her 12th husband.
I mean, I was completely shocked. I was like, I don't know how I missed that. And she started telling me some of the similarities between mine and these previous guys.
And through Katie's research, it appeared that Bobby had a favorite target: military men.
I think she targets the military guys because she knows that they have a steady income and they went out to sea and they would be gone for months at a time. So basically, she could run up their bank accounts and spend money without them knowing about it.
She draws them in. She has that personality that catches their attention, and then it just switches. And they're left in ruins trying to figure out what happened and how did they miss all this was going on.
I think Bobby knew that military men were easy targets. We were lonely. A lot of us were young. We were kind of naive because most of us hadn't been away from home.
And according to court records, some of those situations led to marriage and eventually children.
Talking to these guys, she was all over them. She wanted to marry them within days or weeks after they met her. And, you know, lots of times it was because she was pregnant.
Bobby has multiple children. Just how many children Bobby has, we're not certain. But we were able to find birth records, and I believe there's at least 8 children that range in ages from like 15, 16 years old to 5 or 6.
But it wouldn't be long before justice caught up with Bobby once again. In July of 2010, she finally resurfaced.
Her luck ran out in Louisiana, and she got caught trying to leave the bar without paying her tab. She was arrested and held because it was a misdemeanor charge.
The next day, the restaurant started getting phone calls from media all over the country about her. They realized who she was. Alabama got a wind of it, and Alabama actually went and extradited her back to face charges because they have found that they did have warrants on her for multiple charges.
On July 18, 2010, Bobby Ann Finley was charged in a Montgomery, Alabama courtroom with a felony theft of the first degree. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison.
When I found out she was actually arrested in jail, I knew that that's where she belongs.
For Corey Wynn, moving on hasn't been easy, but his outlook is optimistic.
Things may not have ended the way that I had hoped, but I never at any point, though, ever have any regrets about anything. You know, my intentions were always good.
Today, as a therapy technician at the Texas State Mental Hospital, Corey spends a lot of time focusing on his career. but he hasn't lost hope of one day having another family.
I do want that family still. As far as getting married again, that's a scary proposition.
They say that love is a gamble. You never know what you might get. Susan Kuhnhausen had always been a skeptic.
I was cautious about marriage. I did not know if I knew how to be married. I didn't see a lot of successful marriages growing up.
But when her mom gave Susan a subscription to a matchmaking company for her 33rd birthday, the ER nurse decided to play her hand. Just 2 weeks later, in January of 1988, Susan got a reply from 40-year-old Mike Kuhnhausen.
I received his letter, and on an afternoon, I rang the number, and a very pleasant-sounding man answered the phone.
Mike told Susan that he had fought in Vietnam and now worked as a janitorial supervisor. He had been married once before and had 2 young children. And best of all, he wasn't afraid to fall in love again. Before long, the two began to date. Although Mike was more of a homebody, he didn't seem to mind Susan's extroverted ways.
He wasn't a big, let's go to have dinner at a restaurant kind of guy, so we did a lot of simple things. But I had plenty of opportunity to continue to hang out with friends, go places, do things, travel, and he seemed to be fine with that.
He was nice to my sister, and he had a good job. He seemed to have a good work ethic, all that sort of thing.
In May of 1988, the couple moved in together, and the relationship took off from there. That December, Mike and Susan tied the knot in front of their families in an intimate ceremony in Reno, Nevada.
We picked Reno, Nevada because what bigger gamble in life is there than marriage? I was very proud that I was brave enough to get married. I was very proud that my spouse was brave enough to marry a second time. So I felt very optimistic about our life together.
Back in Portland, the newlyweds quickly settled into married life, and Susan felt like her gamble had paid off. She loved Mike's kids like they were her own, and her family felt complete. But one night, Mike said something strange.
Mike told me marriage changes people, and he asked me one evening, so who do you think is going to change more, you or me?
For Susan, it seemed that married life had changed them both for the better. But 18 years later, she would realize just how wrong she had been. On September 6, 2006, Susan came home to find a disturbing note from Mike.
Basically, it said that he was stressed, that he couldn't deal with all the issues anymore, that he was going to go to the beach.
Over the last few years, their marriage had taken a bad turn. But what bothered Susan was something else entirely. Her house seemed unusually dark.
When I rounded the corner to my room, I saw that the door was partially closed and it was dark. So I presumed I didn't open the drapes that day like I usually did. So I stepped forward.
And that's when Susan realized she wasn't alone.
From behind the door stepped a man wearing yellow gloves who had a hammer in his hand, and he began to hit me in the face and in the head with the hammer.
Terrified, Susan tried to run, but quickly realized she was trapped.
What I saw in his eyes and what I heard in his voice terrified me because he was not afraid. He seemed surprised, but the very scary part was he seemed excited.
The assailant lifted his hammer to swing again, but Susan wasn't going down without a fight.
I said, "You are not going to kill me in my own home."
That's terrifying. It's something you don't recover from.
He was there to kill me, and I was going to do my best to survive.
In the spring of 2001, 5 years before the attack that would change her life forever, Susan Kuhnhausen and her husband Mike were busy juggling work and family life.
He had the children every other weekend. We seemed to get along great. We did a lot of things with his parents, and we continued to work our various shifts.
For 13 years, their marriage had been a happy one, but over time, that began to change.
I noticed that he was concerned about the amount of money that I spent when I would go out with friends, having dinner with others, going to movies, those type of things.
Susan was baffled. She had always made more money than Mike, and their finances were never an issue. Before long, good friend Helen Balone noticed a change in Mike, too.
As time wore on in their marriage, he seemed to become more negative. Even just when I would call sometimes and be talking to Susan, he would be listening in the background, and frequently she would just hang up because it just wasn't worth the trouble.
By the winter of 2002, Mike's behavior had gone from bad to worse.
Mike talked about the fact that he was not sure that he had ever been happy. He told me that he wasn't sure what happiness was. He was a chain smoker. He drank a great deal of caffeine. And over time, his anxiety was more profound.
Mike didn't tell me very much about Vietnam, but I kept telling him after I got involved with the VA that some of the things that he did in his personality showed me post-traumatic stress.
By the summer of 2005, with little change in Mike's behavior, Susan was at her wit's end.
I asked Mike to go to counseling with me, and he said, no, I'm not going to counseling. He felt that counseling had pretty much sealed the deal on his first divorce. And I said, well, if you're not willing to work on the relationship, then I'm getting a divorce. So he reluctantly agreed that he would go to counseling with me. But by the end of summer, we had really not had any significant improvement.
In September of 2005, the couple agreed to a trial separation.
I didn't want to fail at marriage, and I didn't want Mike to fail a second time. No matter how I changed my life to accommodate his needs, it was not working. And I felt I was losing my own life as well.
That fall, Mike moved in with his father. For the sake of the grandchildren they now shared, Susan tried to keep things as normal as possible.
We continued to do things together as a family. He would come over to the house and spend time with us.
Susan only had one request.
I did say, please don't come over when I'm not here. My concern was, I thought that maybe he had been in the house and had been going through my stuff. At one point, I replaced a damaged deadbolt on the front door, and he was very concerned that the locks had been changed.
Although determined to stay friends, Susan knew that she had made the right decision.
I think once Mike moved out, things lightened considerably for Susan.
I knew that I had been happy. I believed that I could be happy again.
By the time the holidays approached, Susan was determined to move on. But Mike seemed far from thrilled with the change.
I had several friends over, and Mike came by, and he looked at us from a distance. He was apart from the rest of the group, and there was a look in his eye, and I thought, he's getting angry. I need to proceed with the divorce.
But before she could free herself from her husband, Susan would have to escape the clutches of a deadly intruder.
In the matter of that space of time, my life as I knew it was dramatically altered forever.
There was a body still there. There was blood. There was signs that there was a struggle.
By January of 2006, Susan Kuhnhausen knew her 18-year marriage to Mike was nearly over. They had been separated for almost 6 months, though they tried to stay on friendly terms.
Even though we were separated, we spent a lot of time together. He came and went. We shared an alarm code, and I didn't feel like I needed to change that. I didn't feel angry at all. I knew that I had made the right decision.
Meanwhile, Susan thought that Mike was continuing to enter her house when she wasn't home.
I thought that he was probably trying to find information about what was going on in my life since the separation.
Susan was taking no chances. By late summer of 2006, she had separated their bank accounts and moved forward with the divorce. But nothing would be easy with Mike. Weeks later, on September 6, 2006, Susan was about to leave town for a nursing convention when she made one last phone call to Mike.
I called Mike that afternoon at about 3 o'clock just to check in with him, and he seemed surprised to hear me, like really kind of almost agitated. And he said, well, I just can't take it anymore. I'm going to the beach. And then he said, well, I left you a note at the house.
Around 6:30 that evening, she arrived home, disarmed the alarm, and found Mike's note.
Basically, it said that he was stressed, that he couldn't deal with all the issues anymore, that he was going to go to the beach.
Just as Susan put down the note and walked away, she found herself under attack by a strange man.
He had a hammer in his hand, and he began to hit me in the face and in the head with the hammer. And I felt in my core of my being that he's going to kill me.
Susan was terrified, but she had no intention of dying. She fought back with everything she had.
I grabbed him by the neck and I said, you are not going to kill me in my own home. And I squeezed until he was purple. I thought he was about to drop, and I let go.
But the man was back on his feet and quickly reached Susan again. He punched her in the face, but as she fell, she brought him down with her. With pure adrenaline and some self-defense training she learned at work, Susan managed to wrestle her attacker for several minutes.
I knew that he was not going to give up the weapon, and then it came to me, and I became the weapon. I leaned forward and I placed my left arm under his neck and I began to squeeze. And I asked him, who sent you here? Tell me who sent you here and I will call you a ambulance. But when I let up to give him an opportunity to say, okay, don't hurt me anymore, he was trying to flip me up. And I knew with certainty that if he got up, I would be dead. And I leaned forward until he stopped struggling.
Her attacker was suddenly silent, so Susan grabbed the hammer and ran. Susan had a hunch who was behind the attack, and she feared her ordeal was far from over.
I got to my neighbor's porch and I said, open the door, call the police. I've been attacked and I think I've killed a man.
Moments later, Susan called 911 and was soon transported to the same hospital where she worked.
I opened the door and there was Susan in the hospital bed, and she had lumps all over her head. She had a huge cut in her lip, bruises on her face. She had bite marks on her arms. And she said, do you think Mike could have done this? And I said, I couldn't imagine it, because at that moment I couldn't imagine it.
Mike and I were about to get a divorce. He was obviously, I thought, under a great deal of stress, and I believe that he must have snapped.
Did Susan's husband of 18 years really hire a hitman to kill her?
Our number one priority was to try to put the pieces together, and the main piece was, where's Michael Kuhnhausen?
On September 6, 2006, Susan Kuhnhausen had narrowly survived a savage attack in her own home. She suspected her husband Mike might be involved, but police had yet to locate him.
I was afraid to go to sleep. I was afraid that I would never sleep again.
Back at Susan's house, detectives confirmed that the intruder was dead.
I thought he might be, but I wasn't sure. And I hoped that he wasn't. I hoped he was unconscious. I did not know. I didn't know.
She's used to helping people. She's not used to something like this. And so this is completely opposite of what her whole purpose in life is.
Investigators soon learned that the man Susan had killed was an experienced hitman named Ed Haffey.
When we started doing some of the research on Ed Haffey, we found that he had spent some time in jail. So we knew that there was a criminal past that started well before this incident itself.
But Ed Haffey wasn't the only thing that was found in Susan's house. The next day, while helping to clean up, Susan's friend Helen found an odd backpack in the basement.
I walked over to it, and the top was open, and inside of it was a notebook that had Mike's cell number in it. And I knew right away that this wasn't something I wanted to touch.
Believing it could belong to the intruder, Helen gave the backpack to the police, and inside there was a note with 2 words on it: "Call Mike." The evidence against Susan's husband was mounting, but he was still nowhere to be found.
I was fearful, but I was never alone at any point. I had no keys to get back into my home, and I certainly would not go there.
9 days later, on September 14th, Portland police finally caught up with Mike Kuhnhausen. And just like his note to Susan had claimed, he was at the beach, 20 miles away.
We assisted the family in getting him back here, and he wasn't really concerned about Susan. It was all about himself.
He never called the police to say, "Hey, that's my wife that was almost killed. What can you tell me?" He never came to our neighborhood to check in with the neighbors about what they might know. He didn't call anyone.
When police questioned Mike about the day of the attack, he admitted that he had been to the house to leave a note for Susan. He also revealed that he knew Ed Haffey.
When he made that comment about knowing the guy, it was almost like the smoking gun to us. For him to make that comment and actually make the connection, that was a huge slip-up on his part.
Officers arrested Mike on the spot, and bail was set at $1 million.
We know that Michael Kuhnhausen had access to the residence. He had been there earlier in the day. We believe that it was at that time that he let Ed Haffey into the residence. We think that the motive was money, and Susan took care of the family. He was now losing his lifeline, and he needed something to keep him afloat.
With her husband in jail, Susan moved forward with the divorce and back into her home.
It was often difficult. I often would make it to the hallway where I would begin to freeze, but there was no longer any evil in my home, and I wanted to stay.
Over the next year, while investigators built a solid case against him, Mike denied any involvement in Susan's attack. Finally, on September 7, 2007, he folded, pleading guilty to solicitation to commit murder. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
When I decided I no longer wanted to live and share his unhappiness, he decided I deserved to be dead. The man who said he loved me wanted me dead. When I made my victim's impact speech, I said to him at one point, at least, if I believed that you deserved to die, I would have had the balls to kill you myself.
Susan had gambled on love and lost.
He had the possibility of 2 years off for good behavior, but I began serving a life sentence because I've killed a man, and I don't get time off for good behavior.
Today, Susan is divorced from Mike and finally moving out of the house where she fought off her attacker.
I chose to stay until it was the right time for me to go, and that time is now.
Sue today is not the same Sue as she used to be. She's not my same sister. And in a lot of ways, I've got a better version.
She's just become very, very much more aware of her surroundings. And the fact that she is alive is really, it's remarkable and it's unusual. Most people don't live through these kinds of things.
Although the scars still linger, Susan finds solace in speaking with groups about the importance of self-defense training. The nurse in her also hopes for more healing.
What would make this all be okay is if I continue to find even greater peace than I'm already finding, and that my ex-husband could find insight how much we all loved him.
The fog in Northern California doesn't just roll in, it conquers. It swallows the coastline, turning the jagged cliffs and the sprawling suburbs into a gray, ghostly void where sound travels differently, muffled and distorted. It is November, 1994. The year of grunge music, of flannel shirts, of a world on the precipice of the digital age, but still firmly rooted in the analog. In a quiet, affluent neighborhood just south of San Francisco, the streetlights are fighting a losing battle against the mist. It is 3 a.m., the witching hour, the time when good people are asleep and the predators come out to feed. In a two-story craftsman house at the end of a cul-de-sac, the only light comes from the glow of a digital alarm clock, flickering red numbers in the darkness. Inside, a woman named Elena is sleeping. She is 23 years old, a graphic designer with a portfolio full of sketches and a life full of promise. She doesn't hear the window slide open downstairs. She doesn't hear the soft, wet crunch of a boot stepping onto the hardwood floor. She doesn't know that her timeline has just run out. The intruder moves with the confidence of someone who owns the night. He is a shadow within a shadow, a silhouette of malice drifting past the family photos on the mantel, past the unfinished coffee cup on the table, past the mundane artifacts of a life in progress. He pauses at the bottom of the stairs. He listens. The house breathes, the hum of the refrigerator, the settling of the foundation, the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. These are the sounds of safety, the background noise of existence. But tonight, they are the soundtrack to a nightmare. He begins to climb. 1 step. 2. The wood groans under his weight, a betraying creak that echoes like a gunshot in the silence. Elena stirs. Her eyes flutter open, adjusting to the gloom. She sees a shape in her doorway, and for a split second, she thinks it's a dream, a hallucination. But then the shape moves, and the dream shatters into a million shards of terrifying reality. The next morning, the sun burns through the fog, revealing a world that looks exactly the same as it did yesterday, but is fundamentally, irrevocably broken. The paperboy throws the Gazette onto the driveway. The neighbor waters his hydrangeas. But the front door of Elena's house is open. Just a crack. A sliver of darkness visible from the street. A jogger notices it first. She slows down, her breath visible in the crisp morning air, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She calls out, "Hello." No answer. Just the wind rustling the eucalyptus trees. She walks up the path, her sneakers crunching on the gravel, and pushes the door. It swings inward with a heavy, reluctant creak. The air inside is stale metallic. It smells of iron and fear. She takes 2 steps into the foyer and looks up the stairs. She screams. It is a sound that tears the morning apart, a primal shriek that wakes the neighborhood and signals the beginning of a mystery that will haunt this town for 3 decades. The police arrive in a blur of blue lights and static radios. They tape off the perimeter, turning the manicured lawn into a crime scene. Detectives Miller and Vance are the first on the scene. They are veterans, men with skin like leather and eyes that have seen too much of the worst of humanity. They walk through the house, stepping carefully over the shattered remnants of the struggle. A lamp knocked over. A vase smashed against the wall. Defensive wounds. She fought. She fought like hell. Miller stands in the bedroom looking at the chaos. He lights a cigarette, a habit he can't break, and exhales smoke into the room that still holds the echo of violence. "Who did this?" he whispers. There is no forced entry at the front. The back window was Jimmy Ed amateur work, but the violence upstairs, that was professional. That was focused. This wasn't a robbery. The jewelry box is untouched. The cash on the dresser is still there. This was personal. Or worse, it was random. A thrill kill. A hunter finding prey. They scour the room for clues, but in 1994, the science of forensics is a blunt instrument. They look for fingerprints, for footprints, for fibers. They find a smudge on the windowsill, a partial boot print in the flower bed outside, and something else. A tiny, almost invisible speck of biological material under the victim's fingernail. A scrap of skin. In 1994, this is just debris. It is bagged, tagged, and labeled Evidence Item 402. They don't know it yet, but they have just bottled the ghost. They have captured the lightning that will one day strike the killer down. But not today. Today, all they have is a dead girl and a cold trail. They interview the neighbors. They talk to the ex-boyfriend. They talk to the mailman. Everyone has an alibi. Everyone has a face of shock and grief. The killer is a phantom. He came from the fog, and he vanished back into it. Weeks turn into months. The yellow tape comes down. The house is sold, repainted, the bad memories whitewashed over by new owners who try not to think about what happened in the master bedroom. But the community remembers. The fear settles into the bones of the town. People install deadbolts. They buy dogs. They stop walking alone at night. The case of Elena remains open, a file on a desk that gets buried under new files, new crimes, new tragedies. Detectives Miller and Vance retire. They hand over the box, the cardboard box containing the photos, the notes, and Evidence Item 402, to the next generation. They leave with the heavy heart of unfinished business. The faces of the victims haunting their sleep. The killer is out there. Maybe he's watching the news. Maybe he's laughing. Maybe he's living a normal life, driving a minivan, coaching Little League, hiding the monster behind a mask of suburban normalcy. 10 years pass. Then 20. The world changes. The internet connects everything. Phones become supercomputers. DNA science evolves from a clumsy giant into a microscopic sniper. The Golden State Killer is caught. Cold cases across the country begin to crack open, revealing the rot inside. But Elena's file sits in the basement of the precinct, in a room that smells of dust and neglect. It is a cold case, a label that sounds clinical but feels like failure. It sits on a metal shelf, sandwiched between an unsolved arson and a missing person report. The ink is fading. The paper is yellowing. But the biological time bomb inside Evidence Item 402 is still potent. It is waiting for the right key to unlock its secrets. Enter Detective Sarah Thorne. It is 2024. She is young, sharp, driven by a relentless need to solve puzzles. She works in the cold case unit, a division tasked with resurrecting the dead. She pulls the box off the shelf. She blows the dust off the lid. She opens it and stares at the black and white crime scene photos. She sees the fear in Elena's eyes, preserved forever in flashbulb glare. She feels the anger rising in her throat. 30 years. Justice has been delayed for 30 years. She picks up the report on the skin sample. In '94 it was useless. In 2004 it was insufficient. But in 2024 it is a map. She sends the sample to a private lab, a facility that specializes in something called forensic genetic genealogy. It is a technique that doesn't just look for a match in the criminal database. It looks for family. It looks for the killer's third cousin, his great-aunt, his distant relative who took an ancestry test to find out if they were Irish. It builds a family tree in reverse. It hunts the hunter through his own bloodline. The lab technicians go to work. They extract the degraded DNA. They amplify it. They sequence it. They turn the biological code of a killer into a string of data. Then they upload it. The database spins. Millions of profiles are scanned in seconds. The computer searches for segments of shared DNA, for the genetic breadcrumbs that link human beings together. It's a long shot. It's a needle in a haystack of needles. Thorne waits. Days pass. She paces her office, drinking stale coffee, staring at the whiteboard where she has pinned Elena's photo. "Talk to me," she whispers to the picture. "Tell me who he is." And then the phone rings. It's the lab. They have a hit. Not the killer, but a second cousin. A woman living in Ohio who has never been to California. It's a start. It's a thread. Thorne grabs the thread and pulls. She builds the tree. She spends nights poring over birth certificates, obituaries, marriage licenses. She becomes a historian of a family she has never met. She traces the lineage down from the great-grandparents, splitting the branches, narrowing the field. She eliminates the women. She eliminates the men who were too young or too old in '94. She eliminates the ones who were in prison or out of the country. And finally, she is left with 3 brothers. The Miller brothers. Raised in Sacramento. Moved to the Bay Area in the early '90s. One of them is a dentist. One is a mechanic. One is a drifter who worked odd jobs. Thorne stares at their names. One of these men is a monster. One of these men has been sleeping soundly for 30 years while Elena's parents died of broken hearts. She needs to know which one. She needs his DNA. But she can't just ask for it. She has to steal it. The operation begins. It is a surveillance mission straight out of a spy novel, but grounded in the gritty reality of police work. Thorne and her team set up on the mechanic first. They watch him for 3 days. He smokes. He spits. They wait for him to discard a cigarette butt. He drops one in a parking lot. They swoop in. They test it. Negative. The mechanic is clean. Thorne feels a pang of frustration, but she pushes it down. 2 left. Next is the drifter. But he's off the grid. Hard to find. So they go for the dentist. Dr. Alan Reeves. He changed his name when he married. He lives in a gated community. He drives a Tesla. He is a pillar of the community. A man who fixes smiles. Thorne parks her unmarked sedan down the street from his pristine lawn. She watches him come out to get the mail. He looks normal. Soft. Doughy. He doesn't look like a killer. But Ted Bundy didn't look like a killer either. Thorne needs his trash. But in a gated community, the trash is collected by private trucks. It's harder to get to. She has to be creative. She follows him to a charity gala. He's wearing a tuxedo. He's laughing, holding a champagne flute. Thorne is dressed as a server. Her heart is hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She weaves through the crowd, carrying a tray of empty glasses. She watches him. He takes a sip. He sets the glass down on a high-top table. He turns to talk to a donor. Thorne moves. She glides through the crowd, her eyes locked on that glass. It is the Holy Grail. It holds the saliva that holds the cells that hold the truth. She reaches out. Her fingers brush the stem. She lifts it. She places it on her tray, sandwiched between other dirty glasses, careful not to touch the rim. She walks back to the kitchen, her pulse deafening in her ears. She bags the glass. She seals it. She rushes it to the lab. The wait is agonizing. 24 hours. Thorne doesn't sleep. She sits in her car outside the precinct, watching the sun come up over the city. The fog is there again, rolling in just like it did in '94. But this time she's not afraid of the fog. She's about to burn it away. Her phone buzzes. It's the text she's been waiting for. Match confirmed. 2 words. 2 simple words that carry the weight of 3 decades of justice. The DNA from the champagne glass is a perfect match to evidence item 402. Dr. Alan Reeves, the respectable dentist, the charity donor, the family man, is the shadow who climbed the stairs. He is the one who extinguished Elena's light. Thorne closes her eyes and lets out a breath she feels like she's been holding since she was a rookie. Gotcha, she whispers. But the arrest isn't the end. It's the beginning of the psychological warfare. They can't just arrest him, they want a confession. They want him to say it. They want to see the mask slip. They plan the takedown. They won't do it at his house. They won't give him the dignity of privacy. They'll do it at his practice. In the middle of the day. Surrounded by the life he stole, the success he built on a foundation of blood. Thorne puts on her vest. She checks her weapon. She looks in the mirror and sees not just herself, but Miller and Vance and Elena's parents, and every detective who hit a wall on this case. They are all standing behind her. They drive to the dental office. The sky is gray. The air is heavy. Thorne walks into the waiting room. The receptionist looks up, startled by the sudden influx of police officers. "We're here for Dr. Reeves," Thorne says, her voice like steel. She pushes through the double doors to the back. Reeves is standing over a patient, a drill in his hand. He hears the commotion. He turns. The mask falls. In that instant, Thorne doesn't see the dentist. She sees the predator. She sees the eyes from the 94 witness sketches that never quite looked right until now. He knows. He drops the drill. It clatters onto the tray. "Alan Reeves," Thorne says, stepping into his personal space. "You are under arrest for the murder of Elena Cruz." The silence in the room is absolute. The patient in the chair sits up, bib still around their neck, eyes wide. Reeves doesn't fight. He doesn't run. He just slumps as if the air has been let out of him. The 30-year burden of his secret has finally crushed him. As they cuff him and walk him out to the car, the cameras are waiting. The news vans are there. The headline is already being written. "Cold case solved." But for Thorne, as she watches him duck into the back of the cruiser, it's not about the headline. It's about the girl in the dark. It's about the silence finally being broken. And as the car drives away, disappearing into the morning mist, the fog finally begins to lift. The interrogation room is a vacuum. A space where time doesn't tick, it drags. The air is thick with the smell of industrial cleaner and the stale, metallic scent of fear that seems to seep out of the very pores of the cinderblock walls. Dr. Alan Reeves sits bolted to the center of the room, his hands cuffed to a steel bar on the table. The fluorescent lights overhead hum with a jagged, persistent frequency, a low-level vibration that grates on the nerves. He is no longer the man in the tuxedo, no longer the pillar of the community with a practiced, porcelain smile. He looks smaller, shrunken. The expensive fabric of his shirt is wrinkled, and a single bead of sweat tracks a slow, glistening path down his temple. Across from him, Detective Sarah Thorne sits in the shadows, her face a mask of predatory patience. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. The silence is her most effective weapon. A heavy, suffocating blanket that forces a man to confront the ghosts he's been running from for 3 decades. Outside the heavy steel door, the precinct is a beehive of controlled chaos. The news has broken, and the shockwaves are leveling the city. The headline is a scream across every digital screen. Local dentist arrested in 1994 cold case. It is a fracture in the reality of every patient who ever sat in his chair, every neighbor who shared a fence with him, every friend who thought they knew the man behind the mask. The community is reeling, a collective gasp that echoes through the suburbs. How could a monster hide in plain sight for 30 years? How could a man who spent his days healing people spend his nights as a phantom of violence? The investigation isn't just about a murder anymore. It's about the deconstruction of a lie. Teams of forensic specialists are currently descending upon his pristine, multi-million-dollar home. Their white suits stark against the manicured lawn. They aren't looking for evidence of a life lived. They are looking for the trophies of a life taken. They are tearing up floorboards, scanning walls with ground-penetrating radar, and emptying the contents of a safe that has remained locked for a generation. Inside the interrogation room, Thorne finally breaks the silence. Her voice is a low, rhythmic murmur, devoid of anger but heavy with the weight of the truth. She lays out the photos on the table, the yellowed, grainy images from 1994. Elena's smile, the blood on the carpet, the broken window. Reeves doesn't look away. His eyes are fixed on the photos with a terrifying, hollow intensity. He isn't looking with remorse. He is looking with recognition. It's the look of a man seeing a long-lost part of himself. Thorne talks about the DNA, the champagne glass, the genealogical map that led them to his doorstep. She talks about the strange clues that were buried in the original file, the specific way the window was forced, a technique used by a man who understood mechanics, who understood how things break. She mentions the missing earring, a small gold hoop that was never found at the scene. And then she leans in, her eyes locking onto his. "We found the box, Alan," she whispers. It's a bluff, a calculated gamble. But the way Reeves' pupils dilate tells her everything she needs to know. The monster has a collection. The narrative of his life begins to unravel like a frayed rope. In 1994, he was a different man, angry, overlooked, a failed student struggling to make his mark. The murder of Elena wasn't just a crime. It was an assertion of power. He had watched her for weeks, a silent shadow in the eucalyptus groves, learning her routine, her vulnerabilities. He chose the fog because the fog was his ally. He moved through the world with a chilling invisibility, a ghost with a grudge. After the killing, he didn't run. He did something far more terrifying. He stayed. He transformed himself. He went back to school, he built a practice, he married into a respectable family. He used the memory of that night as a secret battery, a dark source of energy that fueled his climb to the top. Every success, every accolade, every thank you from a grateful patient was a middle finger to the justice system that couldn't catch him. He thought he had one. He thought the passage of time had turned his blood-stained hands clean. But the past is a persistent hunter. While he was building his empire of lies, the world was changing. The science was catching up. The cold case wasn't dead. It was just hibernating, waiting for the temperature to rise. Thorne watches as the realization finally settles into his bones. The arrogance begins to leak out of him, replaced by a cold, clinical detachment. He starts to talk. Not a confession, not yet, but a series of what-ifs and hypotheticals. He speaks about the nature of impulse, about the fragility of the human spirit. It's a defense mechanism, a way to distance himself from the brutality of the act. But Thorne doesn't let him drift. She brings him back to the room, back to the blood, back to the girl who pleaded for her life while he watched the light fade from her eyes. She shows him the impact statements from Elena's brothers, men who grew up in the shadow of a tragedy they couldn't understand. She shows him the photo of a mother who died holding a picture of a daughter she never saw grow old. The tension in the room reaches a breaking point. Outside, the sun is setting, casting long skeletal shadows across the precinct parking lot. The media frenzy has reached a fever pitch, the glow of the news trucks creating a surreal neon circus. Inside, the battle of wills continues. Reeves is a man who has spent 30 years controlling every aspect of his environment, and the loss of that control is a physical agony. He shifts in his chair, the metal groaning. He asks for water. His voice is raspy, the sound of a voice that hasn't been used for anything but lies in a very long time. Thorne watches him drink, her eyes tracing the movement of his throat. She is looking for the tell, the minute tremor that signals the collapse. And then it happens. A question about the gold earring. A mention of a specific detail only the killer would know. The way she was positioned, the final words she whispered. Reeves stops drinking. He sets the cup down with a deliberate, trembling slowness. The mask doesn't just slip, it shatters. The nice dentist vanishes, and for a fleeting, horrifying second, the man from 1994 is back in the room. His eyes turn dark, a void where empathy should be. He leans forward, his voice a cold, sharp blade. "You think you know me," he says, the words dripping with a sudden venomous pride. "You think this is about one night in a house with a broken window. You have no idea what it takes to build a life out of nothing. You have no idea what it feels like to be God for 10 minutes. The room goes ice cold. It isn't a confession in the legal sense, but it's a revelation of the soul. It's the admission of a psychopath who views his crime not as a sin, but as a masterpiece. Thorne feels a shiver of pure, primal revulsion, but she doesn't flinch. She has him. The recording is rolling. The detectives behind the glass are holding their breath. The 30-year-old wall is crumbling, and the rot underneath is finally being exposed to the light. The search at the house produces its first major breakthrough. In a hidden compartment behind a mirrored wall in his private study, the forensic team finds a velvet-lined box. Inside are items that have no business being in the home of a respectable dentist. A single gold hoop earring, a locket with a picture of a girl who isn't his wife, a collection of newspaper clippings from 1994, yellowed and worn from decades of handling. These are his trophies, his anchors to the night he felt most alive. The discovery is the final nail in the coffin of his public persona. As the evidence is bagged and catalogued, the reality of his double life becomes undeniable. He wasn't just a killer who got lucky. He was a serial predator who had been collecting moments of terror his entire life. The investigators begin to look at other unsolved cases in the areas where he lived and worked. Missing women, cold cases that were previously thought to be unrelated. The scope of the horror is expanding, threatening to swallow the entire state. As the night deepens, the interrogation shifts from the how to the why. But for a man like Reeves, there is no why that makes sense to a rational mind. There is only the hunger, the need to dominate, to erase, to stand above the wreckage of another person's existence. He talks about the thrill of the hunt, the way the fog felt against his skin as he waited in the shadows. He describes the sound of the window sliding open as the most beautiful music he'd ever heard. The details are sickening, a visceral descent into a mind devoid of human warmth. Thorne feels the weight of the tragedy pressing in on her, the sheer senselessness of it all. A life ended, a family destroyed, a community traumatized, all for the fleeting gratification of a monster's whim. And yet, there is a grim satisfaction in the process. Each word he speaks is a brick in the wall of his own prison. Each detail he reveals is a debt being paid. The news of the trophies spreads through the precinct like wildfire. The case is no longer just solved, it is an epic of justice. The phone lines are jammed with calls from across the country, families of victims of other cold cases, wondering if their monster is finally in a cage. The California 30-year cold case has become a catalyst for a national reckoning. It is a testament to the power of persistence, the refusal of the dead to stay buried. But in the quiet of the interrogation room, the victory feels heavy. Thorne looks at the man across from her and sees the wreckage of a human being. She sees the void. She realizes that for 30 years, this man walked among them, smiled at them, touched their lives, all while harboring a darkness that could extinguish the sun. The nice neighbor is a myth. The safe suburb is a facade. The only thing that is real is the evidence, the DNA, and the cold, hard truth that justice, no matter how delayed, is inevitable. As the dawn begins to break over the California hills, a pale, sickly light filtering through the high windows of the precinct, the interrogation finally ends. Reeves is led away, his head bowed, his walk a slow, defeated shuffle. He is headed for a cell from which he will likely never emerge. The Golden State is waking up to a world that feels a little less certain, a little more dangerous. The fog is lifting, but the chill remains. The case of Elena Cruz is closed, but the echoes of her story will resonate for years to come. It is a story of a life stolen, a ghost caught, and a silence that was finally violently broken. But as Thorne stands in the empty interrogation room, looking at the abandoned coffee cups and the scattered photos, she knows that for every Alan Reeves they catch, there are others still out there, waiting in the fog, thinking they have won. The fight isn't over. It's just moved into a new era. And the shadows are always watching. The final image of the night is the velvet-lined box sitting in an evidence locker, the gold earring catching a stray beam of light. It is a tiny, fragile thing, a symbol of a life that was once full of dreams and sketches. For 30 years it was a secret. Now it is a witness. It is the end of the line for a killer, and the beginning of a long, painful healing process for a community that can finally, truly stop looking over its shoulder. The 30-year silence has ended, and the truth has found its voice. The arrest of Dr. Alan Reeves acts as a tectonic shift, a seismic event that levels the carefully constructed silence of 3 decades and replaces it with a cacophony of questions that no one is prepared to answer. While Reeves sits in his cell, a stark, concrete box that stands in mocking contrast to his glass-walled dental practice, the world outside is undergoing a violent awakening. The news of the trophy box found behind his study wall travels through the veins of the state like a poison, igniting a firestorm of speculation and terror. It isn't just about Elena Cruz anymore. It's about the items that don't belong to her. It's about the gold locket with the faded photograph of a girl with auburn hair. It's about the newspaper clippings of disappearances that the police had long ago categorized as unsolved or runaways. The scope of the investigation is ballooning, transforming from a single cold case into a hunt for a potential serial predator who may have used the vast, sun-drenched landscape of California as his private killing field. In the hallways of the precinct, the atmosphere is electric with a grim, frantic energy. The phone lines are no longer just ringing. They are screaming. Families from across the country, mothers who haven't slept soundly since 1992, fathers who have spent their retirement staring at missing person posters, are all calling with the same desperate, trembling question. Is my daughter in that box? Detective Sarah Thorne is at the center of this storm, her desk buried under a mountain of old files and fresh leads. She is no longer just investigating a murder. She is an architect of memory, trying to rebuild the broken timelines of dozens of forgotten lives. She looks at the auburn-haired girl in the locket. The photo is tiny, barely the size of a thumbnail, but the eyes are full of a haunting, youthful light. Who is she? Where did she go? And why did Alan Reeves keep her close to his heart for 30 years? The locket becomes the new North Star of the investigation, a golden clue that points toward a darkness even deeper than the one they found in Elena's bedroom. The forensic teams are working in shifts, their eyes strained under the harsh glare of the lab lights. They are performing a digital autopsy on Reeves' entire life. They are tracking every car he ever owned, every apartment he ever rented, every credit card transaction that can be salvaged from the analog archives of the 90s. They find a pattern, a chilling, methodical pattern of movement. Before he was a dentist, before he was a pillar of the community, Reeves was a drifter of sorts, moving between Sacramento, San Jose, and the rugged foothills of the Sierra Nevada. And everywhere he went, a shadow seemed to follow. A missing waitress in Fresno, a hitchhiker who vanished near Lake Tahoe, a young student whose bicycle was found abandoned on a lonely road in the Central Valley. The Miller brothers' history Thorne had researched earlier now feels like a map of a massacre. The brothers, the mechanic, the drifter, and the dentist were a unit, but Reeves was the brain, the one who moved with the most precision, the one who knew how to hide the blood under a coat of professional respectability. Back at the dental practice, the scene is one of pure, unadulterated horror. Patients who had seen Reeves for years are coming forward, their voices shaking as they recount their experiences in his chair. The realization is a physical blow. He had been inside their mouths. He had held their lives in his hands while they were sedated, helpless, and vulnerable. The trust that is inherent in the doctor-patient relationship has been weaponized, turned into a source of retrospective trauma. He was always so calm, one woman tells a news reporter, her face pale. He had such steady hands. To think that those same hands. She can't finish the sentence. She doesn't have to. The community is looking back at every interaction they had with him, searching for the crack in the mask they all missed. The nice guy who donated to the school band. The generous neighbor who hosted the annual 4th of July barbecue. It was all a performance, a 30-year-long con played against the very people he was secretly hunting. Thorne dives into the archives of the Sacramento Police Department, pulling files from the late 80s and early 90s. She finds a case that makes her blood run cold. 1989. A young woman named Claire, 21 years old, vanished after a shift at a local diner. Her body was never found, but her car was discovered 3 days later, parked at a trailhead. Inside the car on the passenger seat was a single earring, a gold hoop, identical to the one found in Reeves' trophy box. The connection is electric, a bolt of lightning that bridges the gap between decades. Thorne realizes that Elena Cruz wasn't the beginning. She was a midpoint. Reeves had been refining his craft, honing his ability to vanish into the fog, long before he stepped into that house in 1994. The cold case is no longer a localized event. It is a historical emergency. The investigation is now a race against time, and the fading memories of witnesses who are now in their 70s and 80s. The defense team for Alan Reeves isn't staying silent. They are high-priced, high-powered sharks who specialize in dismantling forensic evidence. They held a press conference on the courthouse steps, their suits sharp and their expressions full of righteous indignation. They are attacking the DNA evidence, calling the genetic genealogy junk science and a violation of privacy. They are claiming that the items in the box were collected by Reeves as part of his interest in local history, or that they were planted by overzealous detectives. They are painting Thorne as a rogue investigator who bullied an old man into a false confession. The legal battle is shaping up to be a war of attrition, a high-stakes chess match where the prize is the truth itself. But Thorne isn't intimidated. She knows what she saw in that interrogation room. She knows the weight of the gold hoop in her hand. She knows that the DNA doesn't lie, even if the man who carries it does. As the days turn into weeks, the pressure on the lab to identify the girl in the locket becomes unbearable. Every auburn-haired girl reported missing in the western United States between 1985 and 2000 is being screened. The digital database is a sea of faces, a gallery of the lost. And then a hit. A woman in Oregon sees the photo on the evening news, a blurred, pixelated version of the locket image, and drops her glass of water. It's her sister. It's her sister, Mary, who went out for a pack of cigarettes in Reno in 1991 and never came home. The identification is confirmed within 48 hours. The locket isn't just a trophy. It's a tombstone. Mary was 24. She had a daughter who is now 33, a woman who grew up wondering if her mother simply didn't want her. The truth is much worse. The truth is that her mother was stolen, kept in a velvet-lined box in a dentist's study like a butterfly pinned to a board. The psychological profile of Alan Reeves is being rewritten. He isn't just a murderer. He is a collector of lives. He didn't just kill. He curated. Each item in that box represents a story he ended, a future he erased. The investigation moves to Reno, then back to Sacramento, then down to the sleepy coastal towns of Big Sur. Everywhere Reeves went, the detectives find anomalies, unsolved disappearances, strange sightings. A man in a dark sedan watching from the edge of a park. The Phantom of the Fog was a traveler, a nomad of death who used the anonymity of the California highway system to move between victims. The scale of his depravity is starting to overshadow the original 1994 case, creating a narrative of a monster whose career spanned nearly 40 years. Thorne returns to the interrogation room. She wants more. She wants the locations. She wants the bodies. Reeves is different this time. He has seen the news. He knows the locket has been identified. He knows the nice dentist is dead and buried. He sits with a strange, eerie composure, his hands folded on the table. He doesn't look like a man facing life in prison. He looks like a man who is enjoying the attention. He is a narcissist who has finally been given the stage he always believed he deserved. He begins to play games, dropping hints about the others, about the places where the ground is soft and the trees are tall. He talks in riddles, a cruel scavenger hunt designed to keep the police dancing to his tune. He wants to trade information for a better cell, for a chance to avoid the death penalty, for a legacy that will outlast him. The community is in a state of perpetual shock. Every day brings a new revelation, a new victim, a new piece of the puzzle that makes the picture more terrifying. The suburban dream has been permanently stained. People look at their neighbors with new suspicious eyes. If Alan Reeves could do this, who else is hiding a box behind their wall? The California 30-year cold case has become a cultural touchstone, a warning about the darkness that can thrive in the heart of the most ordinary places. It is a story of how a single drop of blood, preserved for 3 decades, can bring down a kingdom of lies. But as the investigation stretches into the vast, rugged terrain of the Sierra Nevada, looking for the final resting places of the forgotten, the victory feels hollow. Justice is coming, but it is arriving 30 years too late for Mary, for Claire, and for Elena. Thorne stands on a ridge overlooking a dense forest near Lake Tahoe, following one of Reeves' cryptic hints. The wind is cold, smelling of pine and impending snow. Below her, a team of cadaver dogs and search and rescue units are moving through the brush. They are looking for a soft spot near a fallen cedar. The silence of the forest is heavy, much like the silence of the canyons back in 1994. It is the silence of a grave. She realizes that the case of Dr. Alan Reeves will never truly be closed. Even if they find every body, even if they identify every item in the box, the why will always remain out of reach. There is no logic to this kind of evil, only a sequence of events and a trail of wreckage. But as the lead dog suddenly freezes and begins to bay, a sharp, mournful sound that echoes across the valley, Thorne knows they've found another one. The ghost is giving up its secrets one bone at a time. The 30-year silence isn't just broken. It's being demolished. The sound of the shovel hitting the earth is a dull, rhythmic thud that vibrates through the soles of Detective Sarah Thorne's boots. It is the sound of a secret being exhaled. Here, in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada, the air is thin, tasting of pine resin and the sharp, metallic tang of an impending storm. The ground is a patchwork of frozen mud and dead needles, a cold storage unit for the atrocities Alan Reeves left behind. The cadaver dogs have stopped barking. They are now sitting in a circle, their ears pricked, their eyes fixed on a specific patch of dirt beneath a twisted, ancient cedar. This is the spot. The soft spot Reeves whispered about in the sterile confines of the interrogation room. As the forensic team peels back the layers of soil, the atmosphere shifts from anticipation to a heavy, suffocating reverence. They aren't just digging a hole. They are opening a door to the 90s, unearthing a chapter of history that was never meant to be read. A flash of white appears in the dark loam. A bone. Small, delicate, stripped of its humanity by time and the chemistry of the earth. The lead forensic anthropologist drops to her knees, switching from a shovel to a hand trowel, and then to a fine brush. She works with the precision of a jeweler, clearing away the grit until a skull emerges. It is tilted at an unnatural angle, as if the victim is still looking for a way out. Beside the remains, half buried in the silt, is a scrap of denim and a plastic barrette, the kind a teenage girl might use to keep her hair out of her eyes while studying. This isn't Mary. This isn't Claire. This is someone else. A new name for the ledger of the lost. The California 30-year cold case is no longer a mystery to be solved. It has become a mass grave to be catalogued. The scale of the horror is expanding at a rate that threatens to overwhelm the resources of the state. While the recovery team works in the mountains, back in the neon-lit corridors of the city, the night dentist has become a global phenomenon. The moniker, coined by a tabloid and adopted by the masses, perfectly captures the jarring duality of Alan Reeves. By day, he was the man who perfected smiles. By night, he was the man who silenced them. The media circus has parked its trailers outside the precinct, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like predatory flowers. Every news cycle brings a new expert to analyze his psyche. Every podcast explores the missed signals of his neighbors. But for Thorne, the noise is just a distraction from the chilling reality of the evidence. She is currently obsessed with the Miller brothers angle. She has been digging into the lives of the mechanic and the drifter, Alan's siblings, wondering if the rot in the Reeves family tree was localized or systemic. Did they know? Did they help? Or were they just more casualties of his genius for deception? She tracks down the mechanic, the older brother, living in a dilapidated trailer on the outskirts of Sacramento. He is a man broken by a different kind of darkness, alcohol and regret. When she shows him the photo of the trophy box, his reaction isn't one of shock, but of a long-delayed, weary recognition. He remembers a lockbox Alan kept in their shared bedroom as teenagers. He remembers the souvenirs Alan would bring home from his long midnight bike rides. "I thought he was just a thief," the brother whispers, his eyes watering in the harsh light of the trailer. "I thought he just liked pretty things. I didn't know the pretty things belonged to dead girls." It's a devastating admission. A 30-year-old failure of intuition that allowed a monster to grow into a predator. He provides Thorne with a list of locations where Alan used to explore: old cabins, abandoned mines, secluded hunting grounds. The map of bones is getting larger, the pins on Thorne's whiteboard spreading across the state like a rash. Back at the lab, the forensic sequence on the new remains is completed. The girl with the barrette is identified as Nikki, a 16-year-old who disappeared from a mall in 1992. Her file had been marked as a runaway because she came from a troubled home. The police back then hadn't looked for her. They had simply waited for her to come back. She never did. She was waiting under a cedar tree for 30 years for someone to care. The news of Nikki's identification sends another shockwave through the community. It's a reminder that Reeves didn't just target those who would be missed. He targeted the vulnerable, the ones the system was predisposed to ignore. He was a scavenger of the forgotten. Thorne feels a simmering rage. This wasn't just a failure of DNA technology. It was a failure of empathy. The cold case was cold because the world had turned its back on the victims long before Alan Reeves ever found them. The legal battle is intensifying. Reeves' defense team has filed a motion to suppress the trophy box, arguing that the search of the hidden compartment exceeded the scope of the original warrant. It's a technicality, a desperate grab for a lifeline. But in the world of high-stakes criminal law, a technicality can be a get-out-of-jail-free card. The judge is wavering. The community is on edge. If the box is thrown out, the link to Mary, Claire, and Nikki becomes circumstantial. The DNA from Elena Cruz's fingernails is still solid, but the defense is now floating a theory of secondary transfer. They are suggesting that Reeves, as a local dentist, might have come into contact with Elena in a professional setting, and that the DNA was transferred innocently. It's a preposterous claim. Elena wasn't his patient, but it only takes one juror to believe a shadow of a doubt. Thorne knows she needs more. She needs the smoking gun that even the most expensive lawyer can't talk his way around. She returns to the trophy box, not looking at the jewelry this time, but at the newspaper clippings. She notices something she missed before. One of the articles about a 1993 disappearance has a series of tiny pinpricked holes in the margins. It looks like a code, or perhaps just a nervous habit of a man reading about his own crimes. She takes the clipping to a cryptographer. After 48 hours of analysis, the result comes back. The pinpricks aren't a code. They are a map. When overlaid on a standard topographical chart of the Bay Area, the holes align perfectly with specific GPS coordinates. Reeves wasn't just keeping track of his press coverage. He was marking his other storage units. He has more than one box. He has a network of secrets buried across the California landscape. The first set of coordinates leads Thorne to a self-storage facility in an industrial zone near the Port of Oakland. The unit has been paid for in cash, under a series of aliases for 3 decades. The paper trail is a ghost, but the physical reality is a concrete bunker. When the lock is cut, the door rolls up to reveal a time capsule of madness. It's not just trophies here, it's a workshop. There are rolls of duct tape from the 90s, brittle and yellowed. There are Polaroid photos, thousands of them, taped to the walls in a mosaic of terror. And in the center of the room, sitting on a rusted metal table, is a dental drill. Not the modern high-speed version from his practice, but an old, portable, hand-cranked model. The implication is sickening. He didn't just kill his victims, he practiced on them. The night dentist wasn't just a name. It was a ritual. Thorne stands in the center of the storage unit, the smell of dust and old plastic clogging her throat. She looks at the Polaroids. She sees faces she recognizes: Elena, Mary, Nikki, and dozens of faces she doesn't. Some of the photos are of women walking down the street, unaware they are being watched. Others are. Later, the progression of the photos shows the evolution of a predator, from the voyeuristic fantasies of his youth to the clinical, detached violence of his prime. This is the smoking gun. No lawyer can explain away a storage unit full of Polaroids of missing women and a blood-stained dental drill. The secondary transfer theory is dead. The innocent collector defense is buried. Alan Reeves isn't just a murderer. He is one of the most prolific and organized serial killers in California history. As Thorne exits the storage unit, the sun is setting over the Oakland skyline, casting long bloody streaks across the water. Her phone rings. It's the DA. The judge has denied the motion to suppress the trophy box. The evidence is in. The trial is a go. But as she looks back at the dark maw of the storage unit, Thorne doesn't feel a sense of victory. She feels a profound, aching exhaustion. The 30-year silence has been replaced by a scream that won't stop. The number of victims is now estimated to be in the double digits, and the work of identifying them, of notifying their families, of piecing together the broken fragments of their lives, will take years. The California cold case has become a monument to the endurance of evil, but also to the relentless, slow-burning fire of justice. The news of the Oakland storage unit breaks like a tidal wave. The public's fascination turns into a visceral, collective horror. The night dentist is no longer a tabloid character. He is a monster of such scale that he defies comprehension. People start checking their own storage units, their own basements, their own histories. The fear is no longer about a man in the fog. It's about the person you might have shared a meal with, the person you trusted with your health, the person who lived a perfect life while maintaining a museum of death. The 30-year-old secret is out, and the light is finally, brutally, exposing everything. But as the forensic teams begin the grim task of emptying the Oakland unit, Thorne knows that there are still more coordinates, more pinpricks, more stories waiting to be told. The silence is gone, but the haunting has just begun. The trial of Dr. Alan Reeves begins not with a roar, but with a chilling clinical silence. The courtroom is a cathedral of tension, packed with the families of the identified, the families of the still missing, and a public that has become obsessed with the deconstruction of a monster. Reeves sits at the defense table, his hair neatly combed, his suit perfectly tailored, looking more like a retired professor than a man accused of orchestrating a 30-year symphony of slaughter. He doesn't look back at the gallery. He doesn't acknowledge the sobbing mothers or the brothers with clenched fists. He stares straight ahead, a captain sinking with his ship, maintained by a terrifying, hollow dignity. Across the aisle, Detective Sarah Thorne is the first witness called to the stand. She carries the weight of the Oakland storage unit in her eyes, a witness to the Polaroids that the jury is about to see. images that will be seared into their minds and change the way they look at the world forever. The prosecution starts with the 1994 murder of Elena Cruz, the anchor of the case. They play the original emergency calls, the frantic voices of neighbors that sound like they've been pulled from a ghost ship. They display the DNA evidence on massive screens, the genetic markers from evidence item 402 aligning perfectly with the sample from the charity gala champagne glass. It is a mathematical execution. The defense tries to pivot, to argue that the DNA was contaminated, that the genetic genealogy is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, but the judge is firm. The science is sound. The past has spoken. But then the prosecution shifts to the other boxes. They introduce the findings from the Oakland unit. The room goes ice cold as the first Polaroid is projected. It is a grainy, sun-bleached image of a woman laughing at a park in 1991. The next photo is of the same woman, but she isn't laughing anymore. The transition is so abrupt, so violent, that a juror audibly gasps, turning their head away from the screen. Thorne narrates the evidence with a voice that is steady, professional, yet underscored by a deep-seated revulsion. She explains the mapping found in the newspaper clippings, the pinpricks that led them to the Sierra Nevada and the industrial docks. She describes the recovery of Nikki and Mary, the girls whose lives were reduced to trophies in a velvet-lined box. But then, she drops the bombshell that even the media didn't see coming. While searching the Oakland storage unit, they found a secondary ledger, a series of dental records that Reeves had stolen from his own practice over 3 decades. These weren't just records, they were a hit list. He had been cross-referencing his patients' addresses, their schedules, and their vulnerabilities. He was a predator who didn't just hunt in the fog. He hunted from the very chair where he promised to heal. The night dentist wasn't just a nickname. It was a terrifying operational reality. He used the anesthesia not just for surgery, but as a rehearsal for the final silence. The defense strikes back with a ferocity born of desperation. They call a world-renowned forensic psychologist who testifies that Reeves suffers from a dissociative break, that the Alan who fixed teeth is a completely different entity than the Alan who prowled the canyons. They are angling for an insanity plea, a way to move him from a prison cell to a psychiatric hospital. They paint a picture of a man haunted by a childhood of neglect, a man whose psyche fractured under the pressure of perfection. But the prosecution is ready. They bring in a rebuttal witness, the oldest Reeves brother, the mechanic. He sits on the stand, his hands shaking, and tells the court about the day Alan was 12 years old. He tells a story about a neighborhood cat, a pair of pliers, and the look in his brother's eyes. A look of pure, undistilled curiosity that had nothing to do with madness and everything to do with malice. He wasn't broken, the brother rasps into the microphone. He was just waiting to happen. As the trial progresses, the California 30-year cold case begins to merge with other, even older mysteries. The FBI joins the task force, linking the pinprick coordinates to a series of unsolved highway killings in Oregon and Nevada from the late 80s. The scope of Reeves' activity is now estimated to cover 4 states and nearly 40 victims. He is no longer just a local murderer. He is a historical anomaly, a serial killer who managed to maintain a high-status professional life for the entirety of his career. The public's reaction shifts from horror to a profound existential dread. If a man like Reeves can exist, if he can be your neighbor, your doctor, your friend's father, then the concept of safety is a lie. The suburban dream is revealed to be a fragile thin crust of ice over a dark, bottomless lake. The most harrowing moment of the trial comes when the prosecution introduces the hand-crank drill found in Oakland. They don't just show it. They bring in a forensic odontologist to testify about the marks found on the skeletal remains recovered from the Sierra Nevada. The witness describes non-therapeutic alterations made to the victim's teeth while they were still alive. The courtroom descends into a stunned, sickening silence. This wasn't just murder. It was a perverse extension of his profession, a way to leave a permanent, invisible signature on his victims. The cruelty is so specific, so methodical, that it strips away any last vestige of the insanity defense. This was planning. This was execution. This was a man who enjoyed the meticulous nature of his work, whether it was on a patient in his office or a victim in a storage unit. Reeves' wife, a woman who had spent 30 years believing she was married to a saint, is called to the stand. She looks like a ghost, her face gaunt, her eyes hollowed out by the realization that her entire life was a choreographed lie. She testifies about the long nights at the office, the emergency surgeries, and the weekend hiking trips that she now realizes were hunting expeditions. She tells the court about the velvet box she once found in his study, and how he had told her it was a collection of vintage dental instruments for a museum. She believed him because she wanted to. She believed him because the alternative was unthinkable. Her testimony is the final stake in the heart of his defense. It proves that the deception was total, that the mask of normalcy was his greatest achievement. In the final days of the trial, the prosecution plays a video found in a hidden compartment of the Oakland unit. It is an old VHS tape converted to digital. The quality is poor, the tracking lines flickering across the screen, but the content is unmistakable. It shows a young Alan Reeves, 30 years younger, standing on the edge of a canyon. He is looking into the camera with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Behind him, the fog is rolling in, the same thick, Northern California mist that would eventually swallow Elena Cruz. He speaks to the camera, his voice thin and tinny. "They think the silence is empty," he says, a chilling smirk playing on his lips. "But the silence is where the truth lives. You just have to know how to listen." The tape cuts to black. The jury sits in total paralyzed stillness. The truth has finally arrived, and it is more terrifying than anyone imagined. The closing arguments are a formality. The evidence is a mountain that no lawyer can climb. The prosecutor stands before the jury, his voice low and heavy. He doesn't talk about DNA or pinpricks. He talks about Elena, Mary, Nikki, and the dozens of others whose names are still being sought. He talks about the 30 years of stolen birthdays, the parents who died in the dark, and the community that was haunted by a phantom they didn't know was their neighbor. He points at Reeves, who is still staring blankly at the wall. "Justice doesn't have an expiration date," the prosecutor says, his voice rising for the first time. "The fog has lifted. The silence is over. It is time to bring them home." The jury deliberates for less than 4 hours. When they return, the guilty verdicts fall like hammer blows. Count 1 guilty. Count 2 guilty. On and on it goes, a rhythmic, punishing litany of justice for every life he took and every secret he kept. Reeves doesn't flinch. He doesn't cry. He accepts the verdict with the same clinical detachment he used to select his victims. He is sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, a sentence that ensures he will die in the same kind of cold, concrete silence he inflicted on so many others. As he is led out of the courtroom in chains, Thorne stands at the back watching him go. She thinks of the girl in the locket, the girl with the auburn hair who finally has a name. She thinks of the Sierra Nevada, where the snow is beginning to fall over the soft spots that are now empty. The trial is over, but the investigation continues. The California 30-year cold case has become a permanent department within the FBI, a dedicated unit tasked with tracing the full extent of Alan Reeves' dark legacy. They are still finding coordinates. They are still matching DNA. They are still breaking the silence for families who have waited decades for a phone call. The 30-year secret is gone, but the echoes of the night dentist will haunt the state for generations. It is a reminder that the most dangerous monsters don't live under the bed. They live across the street, they fix your smile, and they wait for the fog to roll in. The case is solved, but the haunting, the true deep haunting of a community that realized it never really knew itself, has only just begun. The prison walls do not just contain the body. They become a repository for the ultimate, unyielding silence of a man who has nothing left to lose and everything to withhold. Alan Reeves, now inmate 88291, sits in a high-security cell in Pelican Bay, stripped of his tailored suits and his professional veneer, yet he retains a terrifying psychological leverage over the state of California. The trial provided the how and the who, but the where remains a sprawling, agonizing map of unfinished business. As the winter of 2025 bleeds into the early months of 2026, Detective Sarah Thorne realizes that the conviction was only a milestone, not the finish line. The California 30-year cold case has morphed into a grim archaeological project. There are still pins on her map that represent ghosts, missing women whose DNA hasn't yet found a match, and pinpricked coordinates that lead to remote, windswept locations where the ground refuses to give up its dead. Thorne visits the prison once a month, a ritual of psychological chess played through a reinforced glass partition. Reeves has aged rapidly since his sentencing. His hair is a shock of white, his skin like parchment, but his eyes remain sharp, predatory, and filled with a mocking intelligence. He enjoys these visits. He views them as a continuation of his practice, a way to maintain a tether to the world he once terrorized. He speaks in riddles, offering scraps of memory in exchange for small comforts. A specific brand of tea, a book on Victorian architecture, a window with a view of the sky. The earth is a patient mistress, detective, he says, his voice a dry rasp that sounds like dead leaves skittering on pavement. She doesn't mind waiting. Most of them are part of the landscape now. They are the roots of the trees you hike under. They are the silt in the streams you drink from. It is a taunt, a reminder that while he is behind bars, he still owns the peace of mind of dozens of families. Back in the field, the task force is utilizing ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery to cross-reference Reeves' pinpricks with historical environmental changes. They discover that Reeves was a student of topography. He chose burial sites that were unlikely to be disturbed by urban sprawl or natural erosion. One such site leads them to a derelict orchard in the Central Valley, a place where the almond trees have grown gnarled and blackened by neglect. Underneath the fourth tree in the seventh row, they find a shallow grave containing a skeleton and a rusted set of keys. The keys belong to a 1988 Toyota Celica, a car that was found abandoned at a rest stop 37 years ago. The victim is identified as a college student who disappeared during a spring break trip. The discovery reignites the media firestorm. But this time, the narrative is different. It's no longer about the night dentist. It's about the California graveyard. The state is forced to confront the reality that for 3 decades, a serial killer was effectively terraforming the landscape with his victims. The psychological toll on the investigative team is immense. Thorne finds herself unable to look at a forest or a quiet field without wondering what lies beneath the surface. She begins to see the world through Reeves' eyes, a collection of soft spots and quiet zones. The 30-year silence has become a permanent ringing in her ears. She spends her nights reviewing the Polaroids from the Oakland storage unit, memorizing the faces of the women whose fates are still unknown. There is one photo in particular, a woman in a yellow sundress standing in front of a fountain, her eyes bright with a joy that feels like an insult to her eventual end. There is no name for her. No missing person report matches her description perfectly. She is a Jane Doe in a yellow dress, a phantom who haunts Thorne's dreams. In a desperate bid to break Reeves' resolve, the prosecution offers a legacy deal. If he reveals the exact locations of all his remaining victims, they will move him to a medium-security facility with better amenities for his final years. It is a controversial move, one that sparks protests from the families of Elena Cruz and Mary, who believe he should rot in the harshest conditions possible. But for the families of the still missing, it is a glimmer of hope, a chance to finally have a grave to visit. Reeves considers the offer with the detached air of a businessman reviewing a contract. He spends weeks drawing maps from memory, intricate, hand-drawn sketches that show an incredible photographic recall of the California wilderness. He marks the Crying Ridge, the Sunken Meadow, and the Hollow Trunk. He is narrating the geography of his own depravity, turning the state's natural beauty into a macabre tour guide of his crimes. The recovery operations begin in earnest as the snow melts in the high Sierras. It is a logistical nightmare involving helicopters, pack mules, and teams of specialized excavators. Each site Reeves marked is a testament to his obsession with control. He didn't just dump bodies, he positioned them. He left markers, stones arranged in patterns, or specific trees notched with a dental tool. At the Crying Ridge, they find 3 sets of remains, all dating back to the late 80s. The cold, dry air of the high altitude has partially mummified the bodies, preserving details that would have been lost in the valley. One of the victims is wearing a class ring from a high school in Nevada. Another has a prosthetic limb with a serial number that leads back to a clinic in San Francisco. The silence is being broken, bone by bone, but the weight of the truth is becoming almost too heavy for the state to bear. As the body count rises, the public's fascination curdles into a deep, cultural trauma. The night dentist has become a shadow that falls over every family photo, every suburban street, every memory of the safe 80s and 90s. The realization that so many women disappeared without a trace, and that their disappearances were often dismissed as runaways or voluntary departures, leads to a massive overhaul of how missing persons cases are handled nationwide. The Elena Cruz Law is drafted, mandating immediate DNA collection and federal database entry for all missing adults. The 30-year-old failure is birth-giving a new era of vigilance. But for Thorne, the legislative victories feel distant. She is still looking for the woman in the yellow sundress. She shows the photo to Reeves during their latest session. He looks at it for a long time, a flicker of something, regret? Pride? Passing over his face. Yellow, he whispers. She was the hardest to catch. She ran for 3 miles through the fog near Mendocino. I almost let her go. Almost. The coordinates for the Mendocino site are the most difficult yet. The area is a labyrinth of sea caves and crumbling cliffs where the Pacific Ocean crashes with a violent, eternal hunger. Thorne leads the team down a treacherous path, the salt spray stinging her eyes, the sound of the waves a deafening roar. They find a hidden crevice, accessible only at low tide, tucked behind a massive rock formation. Inside, the air is damp and freezing, smelling of kelp and ancient stone. They find her there. The woman in the yellow dress. The fabric is tattered, faded to a dull ochre, but it is unmistakable. She is curled into a fetal position, tucked into a natural niche in the cave wall. There is a gold locket around her neck, similar to the one found in the trophy box, but this one is empty. No photo. No name. Just a hollow vessel for a life that was chased through the fog until it ran out of land. The identification of the yellow dress woman takes another 6 months. She was a traveler from England, a backpacker who had told her family she was going off the grid to find herself in the California wilderness. Because she was an international traveler in a pre-digital age, her disappearance never triggered the right alarms. She simply faded out of existence, a British ghost in a California cave. Her family, now elderly and living in a small village outside of London, receives the news with a mixture of agony and relief. 30 years of wondering is over. The silence has been replaced by a funeral. Thorne stands at the airport as the remains are loaded onto a plane for the flight back across the Atlantic. She feels a sense of closure that is as cold as the Mendocino fog. But as the plane disappears into the clouds, Thorne's phone buzzes. It's a message from the lab. They've finished a new scan of the trophy box, using a high-intensity forensic light. They've found something etched into the velvet lining, something invisible to the naked eye. It's not a name. It's not a coordinate. It's a date. A date in the future. October 14, 2026. The 30-year anniversary of a crime that hasn't happened yet? Or a reminder of a secret that is still ticking? Thorne looks at the screen, the neon lights of the terminal reflecting in her eyes. The 30-year cold case is solved, but the man in the cell isn't finished playing. The night dentist has left one last appointment on the books, and the clock is already ticking. The silence hasn't just been broken, it's being replaced by a countdown. The date etched into the velvet, October 14, 2026, hangs over the investigation like a guillotine blade suspended by a fraying thread. It is a psychological landmine, a final piece of performance art from a man who has turned the destruction of lives into a curated gallery. Detective Sarah Thorne stands in the evidence locker, the high-intensity forensic light casting a surreal ultraviolet glow over the trophy box. The numbers seem to hum with a malevolent energy. In the world of Alan Reeves, nothing is accidental. Every pinprick, every Polaroid, every gold hoop was a deliberate choice. This date, nearly a year into the future, suggests a terrifying possibility. That the night dentist didn't just collect the past, he attempted to choreograph the future. Is it a location? A final victim? Or is it the day he expects the world he built to finally, completely collapse? The sense of urgency at the precinct shifts from a crawl to a frantic, disjointed sprint. Thorne returns to Pelican Bay, her footsteps echoing on the polished linoleum with a jagged, uneven rhythm. She doesn't wait for the pleasantries this time. She presses the photo of the etched date against the glass partition. Reeves looks at it, and for the first time in 30 years, his expression isn't one of mockery or pride. It is a look of profound, serene anticipation. He leans in close, his breath fogging the glass, his eyes reflecting the fluorescent overheads like 2 dead moons. Some stories need an epilogue, Sarah. He whispers, the rasp in his voice sounding like bone scraping against bone. You've spent so much time looking at where they are. You never asked what they were carrying. October is a beautiful month in the canyons. The air gets thin. The secrets get heavy. You have 10 months to find the key. If you don't, the silence will become permanent. Thorne leaves the prison feeling like she's breathing through a mouthful of silt. She realizes that Reeves' legacy deal was a Trojan horse. He gave them the soft spots and the hollow trunks to distract them, to keep them digging in the dirt, while the real threat remained dormant in the digital and physical archives of his life. She begins a total re-audit of the Oakland storage unit. She ignores the Polaroids and the drills. She focuses on the mundane, the stacks of old dental journals, the boxes of patient files, the mundane receipts for car repairs and gas. She starts to look for a pattern in his timing. October 14th. She finds it. Every 5 years on that exact date, Reeves made a significant withdrawal from a hidden offshore account. 1996. 2001. 2006. 2011. 2016. 2021. The money didn't go to luxury or travel. It disappeared into a shell company called the Silversmith Group. The investigation into Silversmith leads Thorne into the dark underbelly of the early internet. It was an encrypted server, an online vault, established in the infancy of the World Wide Web. Before there was the cloud, there was Silversmith. It was designed to store data that would only be released upon the failure of a dead man's switch. Reeves wasn't just keeping a box behind his wall. He was keeping a digital ledger of every person he ever spared. Every person he watched but didn't take. Every witness who saw him and didn't know what they were looking at. The realization hits Thorne with the force of a physical blow. The 30-year cold case isn't a list of the dead. It's a list of the living who are still in danger. October 14, 2026, isn't a date for a new murder. It's the day the switch flips. It's the day the names, addresses, and observations of his uncollected targets are released to the dark web. A final gift to the predators he knows are out there. The task force is expanded to include cyber forensics and national security experts. They are trying to hack a 30-year-old encryption that was built with the cold, logical precision of a master dentist. It is a maze of vintage code and dead ends. Meanwhile, the community is once again plunged into a state of paranoid hysteria. The night dentist is no longer just a killer from the past. He is a looming threat to the future. Every woman who lived in California in the 90s, every patient who ever sat in his chair, is wondering if they are on the list. The trust that Thorne worked so hard to rebuild is vaporizing. The Golden State feels like a trap. The fog that rolled in over Elena Cruz in 1994 has finally covered the entire map. Thorne spends her nights in the archives, her eyes bloodshot, her mind a whirling kaleidoscope of faces and dates. She starts to look at the failed encounters Reeves mentioned, the women who almost got away. She finds a police report from 1999. A woman who claimed she was being followed by a man in a dark sedan near a dental conference in Monterey. The report was dismissed at the time as female paranoia. Thorne tracks the woman down. She is living in a fortified house in Arizona, a woman who has spent 25 years looking over her shoulder. He didn't just follow me, she tells Thorne, her voice a trembling whisper. He left a note on my windshield. It just said, "Not today." October 14th. I thought it was a prank. I've spent my life waiting for that day. The psychological warfare of Alan Reeves is total. He has turned time itself into a weapon. As the months tick down toward the anniversary, the pressure on the task force becomes a crushing weight. They are fighting a ghost in the machine, a digital shadow cast by a man in a concrete cell. Every lead in the Silversmith code ends in a riddle. The root canal is deep. The extraction requires patience. He is using his own professional terminology to taunt the hackers. Thorne realizes that they won't break the code through brute force. They have to break the man. She returns to Pelican Bay. But this time, she doesn't bring evidence. She brings a mirror. She sits across from Reeves and says nothing. For 4 hours she simply holds a mirror up to the glass. He tries to talk, tries to taunt, tries to laugh, but his own reflection, old, withered, shorn of his power, is the only thing he can see. The night dentist is confronted with the reality that his masterpiece will end with him dying in a cage, unobserved and unloved. The narcissism that fueled his crimes begins to eat itself. He starts to crack. Not with a confession but with a mistake. He mentions a key hidden in the one place they haven't looked, the mouth of the only person he ever truly loved. Thorne rushes to the cemetery where Reeves' mother is buried. It is a grim midnight exhumation under the glare of floodlights. The coffin is opened, the smell of damp earth and decayed silk filling the air. They don't find a key in her hand or her pocket. They find it in her jaw. A vintage, gold-crowned molar, surgically implanted after her death. Inside the crown is a microscopic chip, a physical seed for the silversmith server. It is a level of depravity that exceeds even Thorne's expectations. He used his own mother's corpse as a hard drive. The chip is rushed to the lab. The hackers plug it in. The digital walls of Silversmith begin to crumble. The list is revealed: thousands of names, thousands of observations, a digital map of a predator's lifelong surveillance. They have the key. They can shut it down. But as the clock on the wall ticks toward midnight on the eve of the anniversary, Thorne notices one final file at the bottom of the server. It's not a name. It's a video file labeled for Sarah. She hesitates, her hand hovering over the mouse. The 30-year silence is about to speak one last time. And she knows, deep in her gut, that whatever is on that screen will be the final, most devastating extraction of all. The cursor blinks on the screen, a rhythmic, pulsing heartbeat in the cold, blue light of the cyberforensics lab. It is the final digital chamber of the Silversmith vault. The file labeled for Sarah sits there like a primed explosive. Outside, the world is holding its breath. The California 30-year cold case has transcended the boundaries of a police investigation. It has become a national trauma, a dark mirror reflecting the hidden vulnerabilities of a generation. Detective Sarah Thorne feels the eyes of the technicians on her, their faces pale and exhausted. They have spent months fighting through the architecture of a madman's mind, and now they are at the center of the labyrinth. Thorne clicks the mouse. The screen flickers, graining with the texture of a digital file compressed and recompressed over decades. The video begins not with the victim, but with the date, October 14, 1994. 3 weeks before the murder of Elena Cruz. The camera is steady, mounted on a tripod in a darkened room. The only light comes from a surgical lamp, focused on a desk covered in architectural blueprints. A hand enters the frame. Alan Reeves' hand, 30 years younger, steady and surgical. He is holding a gold crown, the same one Thorne recovered from his mother's jaw. He speaks, and the voice is chillingly familiar, devoid of the age and rasp of the man in Pelican Bay. It is the voice of a man at the height of his power, a man who believes he is an artist. The extraction of a life is easy, Sarah, he says to the lens, as if he can see through time itself to the woman watching him in 2026. The extraction of a legacy is where the true work begins. You think you've found the victims. You think you've mapped the graves. But you haven't looked at the shadows I left behind. The video cuts to a series of surveillance clips. They are high resolution for the era, stolen from security feeds and private cameras. They show a young Sarah Thorne. She is a child, then a teenager, then a cadet at the police academy. The breath leaves Thorne's body in a sharp, painful gasp. The night dentist wasn't just watching his victims. He was watching the woman he chose to be his nemesis. He had been cultivating the investigator who would eventually catch him. He didn't just stumble into her path. He paved it. He chose Elena Cruz because he knew she lived in the district where Thorne's father was a senior officer. He left the evidence item 402 under the fingernail not as a mistake, but as a seed. He wanted to be found, but only when the science was ready, and only by her. The 30-year silence was a choreographed wait for his chosen audience. The realization is a physical sickness. The success of her career, the high-profile solve, the justice for Elena. It was all a script written by the monster in the cage. Reeves wasn't just a killer. He was a director. He used the lives of dozens of women as props in a 30-year-long play designed to immortalize himself in the mind of a single person. The Silversmith list of the living wasn't a hit list for other predators. It was a list of Thorne's own friends, family, and colleagues. He has been holding them hostage in his mind for 3 decades, waiting for this specific moment to reveal that he was always there, a silent passenger in her life. The final appointment on the books wasn't a new murder. It was the psychological demolition of the woman who solved the case. The video continues, moving into the present day. It shows the interior of the Pelican Bay interrogation room from an angle Thorne didn't know existed. It shows her sitting across from him holding the mirror. But the audio is different. It's a secondary track. A recording of Reeves whispering to himself when she wasn't in the room. "Almost there, Sarah," he mutters, his eyes fixed on the empty chair. The root is exposed. Now we pull. The screen goes black, replaced by a final set of coordinates. They aren't in the mountains or the sea caves. They are in the basement of the house where Thorne grew up. The house her father still lives in. The house that was supposed to be the one safe place in a world filled with soft spots. The tactical response is immediate. Thorne is stripped of her weapon and placed in a secondary vehicle for her own safety. But she refuses to stay behind. She is a passenger in a high-speed convoy tearing through the foggy suburbs of Sacramento. The blue and red lights painting the eucalyptus trees in a strobing, violent rhythm. Her mind is a fractured landscape of memories, childhood birthdays, her father's graduation from the force, the quiet nights in that basement playing with old files. She realizes with a jolt of terror that the old files her father kept weren't just police records. He was one of the original investigators on the 1989 Claire disappearance. He was the one who missed the gold hoop. Reeves didn't just choose her. He chose her bloodline. They reached the house. It is a quiet, unassuming craftsman, a twin to the one where Elena Cruz died. Her father is standing on the porch, confused and shaken by the sudden arrival of a SWAT team. Thorne pushes past the perimeter, her heart hammering a frantic, uneven beat against her ribs. She heads for the basement, the smell of old paper and damp concrete rising to meet her. The team moves with surgical precision, scanning the floorboards with thermal imaging. They find a hollow space beneath the heavy oak workbench where her father used to fix her toys. The wood is pried back, revealing a metal container. It isn't a trophy box. It's a journal. Inside the journal is the true legacy. It's not a list of more victims. It's a detailed account of how Reeves manipulated the original investigation in 1994. It contains proof that evidence was planted, that witnesses were intimidated, and that certain leads were intentionally redirected toward drifters and shadows. And at the bottom of the final page, a single devastating sentence: "Ask your father about the night in 1989 at the diner." Thorne turns to look at her father, who is standing at the top of the stairs, the light behind him making him look like a silhouette. He is trembling. The California 30-year cold case hasn't just been solved, it has been inverted. The hero of the story is dead, and the investigator is left standing in the ruins of her own history. The silence in the basement is absolute, heavier than the fog, colder than the Sierra snow. The night dentist has performed his final extraction. He has removed the one thing Thorne had left, her faith in the justice she thought she had served. As the clock strikes midnight on October 14, 2026, the silence doesn't break. It deepens. The case is solved, but the truth is a wound that will never close. Thorne stands in the dark, the journal in her hands, realizing that for 30 years, the monster wasn't just in the canyons. He was in the very foundation of her life. And the worst part is she knows he's in his cell right now, listening to the silence and smiling. The basement of the house in Sacramento becomes the epicenter of a new, more intimate horror. The air is stagnant, smelling of dust and the metallic tang of old tools. As Detective Sarah Thorne looks up at the silhouette of her father, the man who taught her that the law was a sacred boundary is now a trembling figure framed by the light of the hallway above. The journal in her hands, Alan Reeves' final psychological masterpiece, is a bridge back to 1989, a year that was supposed to be a distant memory, but has now become a living nightmare. Her father's voice, when it finally comes, is a broken whisper, barely audible over the hum of the forensics team's equipment. "I didn't have a choice, Sarah," he rasps. "He didn't just kill Claire. He took photos. He made it look like I was there. He made it look like I was part of it." The night dentist didn't just extract lives. He extracted souls. He didn't just kill his victims, he compromised the people who were supposed to protect them. Thorne realizes that her father hasn't just been living with grief for 30 years. He's been living with a leash around his neck, held by a monster in a tuxedo. The failure of the original investigation wasn't incompetence. It was a forced retreat. Every time a lead got too close to Reeves, a phone call would be made, a photo would be delivered, and a detective would be forced to look the other way. The 30-year cold case wasn't a mystery. It was a hostage situation that spanned a generation. Thorne feels a wave of nausea so profound she has to lean against the cold concrete wall for support. The hero she worshipped, the career she built, the justice she thought she'd won. It was all a theater of shadows, curated by the man in Pelican Bay. The forensics team finds more than just the journal. Hidden behind the insulation in the basement walls are dozens of audio cassettes, labeled with dates spanning 3 decades. They play the first one. It's a recording of a phone call from 1994. The voice is unmistakable. Alan Reeves, calm, polite, and terrifying. "The girl in the canyon was a mistake, detective," Reeves says on the tape. "But your daughter. She has so much potential. It would be a shame if she grew up knowing what you did in '89. Let's make sure evidence item 402 stays at the bottom of the box for a few decades, shall we?" The silence that follows on the tape is the sound of a father's spirit breaking. Thorne realizes that her entire life, from her interest in law enforcement to her lucky break on the Elena Cruz case, was a path cleared for her by a killer who wanted to ensure that when the truth finally came out, it would hurt the most. While the house in Sacramento is being deconstructed, a parallel drama is unfolding in the media. The news of the silversmith list has leaked, but it's not the list of victims the public expected. It's a list of the complicit. Names of former officers, judges, and city officials who had appointments with Dr. Reeves, not for their teeth but for their secrets. The night dentist had turned his dental practice into a clearinghouse for blackmail, a hive where he gathered the sins of the community and used them to build a fortress of immunity. The 30-year-old secret isn't just about a murder anymore. It's about the systemic rot of a city that allowed a monster to thrive because it was too afraid of its own reflection. The Golden State is watching its institutions crumble in real time as the contents of the silversmith server are analyzed by independent journalists and federal investigators. Thorne returns to Pelican Bay for one final confrontation. She doesn't bring a mirror this time. She brings the journal. She sits across from Reeves, who looks more invigorated than he has in months. He looks at her with a paternalistic pride that makes her skin crawl. "Did you find it, Sarah?" he asks, his voice almost melodic. "Did you find the root? You see, a tooth can look perfect on the surface, white and strong, but underneath the decay can be absolute. You thought you were the one cleaning up the mess. But you were just the final piece of the puzzle. You are my masterpiece. The daughter of the man I broke, catching the man who broke him, only to find that the victory is hollow. The psychological weight of the revelation is a crushing gravity." Thorne realizes that Reeves' goal wasn't just to kill. It was to prove that there is no such thing as an innocent person. He wanted to show her that the line between the hunter and the hunted is a blur, that the justice she serves is built on a foundation of lies and compromise. He waits for her to break, for her to scream, for her to show the same fractured psyche he spent his life cultivating in others. But as she looks at him, she sees something he didn't account for. She sees his desperation. She sees that for all his planning, for all his directing, he is still just a man in a cage, terrified of the one thing he couldn't control, the truth's ability to transcend the people who tell it. "You're wrong, Alan," she says, her voice steady, cold, and final. "My father's sins are his own. Your crimes are yours. And the fact that you spent 30 years trying to tie them together doesn't make you a director. It makes you a coward who couldn't face the world without a hostage." She stands up and slides the journal across the table. "The world doesn't care about your masterpiece anymore. They don't care about the night dentist. They only care about the names in that box. They care about the women you tried to turn into props. You're not the center of this story anymore. You're just a footnote in theirs." The look on Reeves' face is a flicker of genuine, unadulterated rage. For the first time, the mask of the calm architect shatters, revealing a small, petty, and deeply insecure man who realized he's lost his audience. He lunges at the glass, his hands clawing at the reinforced surface, but Thorne is already walking away. She doesn't look back. She walks through the heavy steel doors, through the security checkpoints, and out into the crisp, morning air of the California coast. The fog is there as always, but it no longer feels like a shroud. Feels like a clearing. The 30-year cold case is solved, But the work of rebuilding is just beginning. Her father is arrested that afternoon, taken away in handcuffs as Thorne watches from the driveway of her childhood home. It is the hardest thing she has ever done, but it is the only way to truly break the cycle. The California graveyard is finally being closed, and the families of the victims are finally being given the one thing Reeves tried to steal from them. A story that belongs to them, not to him. As the sun breaks through the mist, Thorne realizes that the silence of the last 30 years wasn't a void. It was a gestation period. And now, finally, the truth is loud enough to drown out the monster. The sun rises over California on a day that feels less like a morning and more like a resurrection. The headline on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle is stark, stripped of all sensationalism. The end of the night. Dr. Alan Reeves, the man who cast a 30-year shadow over the West Coast, is no longer the protagonist of the story. His name is already beginning to recede, pushed to the margins by the names of the women he took: Elena, Mary, Nikki, the girl in the yellow dress. The silversmith server has been dismantled, its terabytes of blackmail and surveillance categorized by a federal task force. The complicit, the judges, the officers, the councilmen who traded their integrity for silence, are being arraigned in courthouses across the state. The system is vomiting up the poison it swallowed for 3 decades. But for Sarah Thorne, standing on the cliffs of Big Sur where the Pacific hammers the continent with an ancient, indifferent rhythm, the victory is quiet. It is internal. It is the silence after a scream. Her father sits in a federal detention center, a man reduced to a ghost in an orange jumpsuit. His confession was full, a weeping, broken litany of fear. He detailed the phone calls in the middle of the night, the photos of a young Sarah playing in the yard that would arrive in his mailbox, the subtle, terrifying reminders that his family's survival hung by a thread held by a dentist in a tuxedo. Thorne has visited him once. They sat on either side of the glass, the partition acting less like a barrier and more like a mirror of the shattered trust between them. "I did it to save you," he had whispered, his hands trembling on the counter. "I know," she had replied, her voice devoid of anger but heavy with a sadness that felt geologic in scale. "But you didn't save me, Dad. You just delayed the haunting." Back at Pelican Bay, the cell of inmate 88291 is silent. Alan Reeves has stopped talking. He has stopped drawing maps. He has stopped playing his games. The rage he felt when Thorne walked away, when she refused to be his final victim, has calcified into a catatonic stupor. He sits on his bunk, staring at the blank concrete wall, stripped of his audience, stripped of his power, stripped of the grand narrative he spent his life constructing. The masterpiece he thought he was building, a legacy of fear that would outlast him, has been dismantled by the very truth he tried to manipulate. He is just an old man in a cage now, a biological machine winding down, waiting for a death that will be unremarkable and unmourned. The night dentist has been extracted, and the cavity he left behind is finally beginning to heal. Thorne drives back to the precinct for the last time. She is resigning today. The badge feels heavy in her pocket, a symbol of a system she believes in but can no longer serve from the inside. She needs to find a new way to fight the fog. She walks through the bullpen, past the desks cluttered with new files, new cases, new mysteries. Her colleagues watch her go with a mixture of awe and pity. They know what she did. They know what it cost her. She places her badge and gun on the captain's desk. The metal makes a sharp clack against the wood. "It's done," she says. The captain, a woman who came up through the ranks with Thorne's father, nods slowly, her eyes wet. "It's done, Sarah. Go find some peace." But peace is an elusive concept for a woman who has stared into the abyss for so long. Thorne drives to the coast, to a small, secluded beach near the site where Elena Cruz was found 30 years ago. She carries the velvet-lined trophy box, now empty, stripped of its evidence, just a hollow shell of rotting wood and fabric. She builds a fire on the sand, piling up driftwood and dry brush from the dunes. The flames crackle and pop, orange tongues licking at the twilight air. She places the box in the center of the fire. She watches the velvet curl and blacken, the wood blister and crack. She watches the physical vessel of 30 years of pain turn into ash and smoke. As the smoke rises, it twists into the air, carried away by the ocean breeze, disappearing into the vast, darkening sky. It is a release, a signal flare to the ghosts that they are finally free to go. She thinks of Elena. She thinks of the girl with the auburn hair. She thinks of the woman in the yellow dress running through the fog. She imagines them not as bodies in the ground, but as they were in the photos, laughing, living, full of a light that no monster could ever truly extinguish. The 30-year cold case wasn't about the darkness. It was about the persistence of that light. It was about the mothers who never stopped calling, the sisters who never stopped looking, the community that refused to let the silence become permanent. Reeves tried to make the story about him, about his genius, his control. But he failed. The story belongs to the women. It always did. As the fire dies down to glowing embers, Thorne feels a presence beside her. Not a ghost, but a memory. The memory of the young girl she was before the world broke her father, before the fog rolled in. She takes a deep breath, tasting the salt and the smoke. The nightmare is over. The night dentist is just a story now. A cautionary tale to be told around campfires, a scar on the history of the state. But the healing has begun. The community is knitting itself back together, stronger, wiser, more vigilant. The Golden State shines a little brighter tonight, not because the darkness is gone forever, but because they know how to fight it now. Thorne walks back to her car, the sound of the ocean fading behind her. She doesn't know what she will do next. Maybe she'll write. Maybe she'll teach. Maybe she'll just drive until she finds a place where the fog doesn't reach. But as she turns the key in the ignition, her phone buzzes. It's a text from an unknown number. She hesitates, a flicker of the old fear pricking at her skin. She opens it. It's a picture. A photo of a sunrise over the Sierra Nevada, taken from a hiking trail that was once a grave site. The caption is simple. Thank you. It's from Elena's brother. Thorne smiles, a genuine bone-deep smile that reaches her eyes. She puts the phone down and drives away, leaving the coast, leaving the past, driving into a future that is finally, truly, her own. The 30-year silence is broken. The case is closed. But the echo of the ghosts will remain, not as a haunting but as a reminder. A reminder that the truth is patient, that love is stubborn, and that no matter how deep the grave, no matter how thick the fog, the light always, always finds a way back in. The inn.